particularly interested, of course, to introduce you to Easkey Britton. And I did think about creating an introduction and what was I going to say, and then I came across Ireland's Coast video, and I thought, that says it all. I had gone on to ChatGPT, and it had created a lovely little sort of concise paragraph, but it still didn't really capture the beauty of the cinematography, the drone photographs, the underwater immersion shots. So Easkey, Easkey's from Rossnowlagh. This is her home. The sea is her playground. And when I first met Easkey, she talked in a language that I can maybe describe as a notion language that I'd never heard before. And having moved to the west coast of Ireland, I mean, I had started to get involved in cold water immersion and getting into lakes and rivers and the sea, but I probably didn't have a language for it. I didn't really know how to describe it. And then suddenly I met Easkey, and she seemed to have this language that made it even more significant. So that's kind of one of the themes over the next couple of days, is to think about the language we use. What does it mean? How do we interpret it? And you know, the use of words, symbols, images, and we'll talk about that in the context of hydrotic medicine. So big welcome to you all, and a massive welcome to Easkey. And I thought we would just have a little intro in terms of talking about some of the work you do, and I think the significance it has in terms of modern Ireland and maybe the world.
I feel a little out of my depth in the expertise in this room, although there was a nice image of feet in that. I just made the connection now. So yeah, it's such an honor and privilege to be here. We're going to play a slideshow we'll be looping that just shows some images that capture my encounters in the ocean, these ones being big wave surfing. But I think it's just wonderful privilege to be here to connect with this sense of place. I think the environment we are in really affects our thinking, the knowledge that will come out of today, and your understanding will be influenced by the choice of Martin choosing this place. And although we couldn't get you all outside, you're all breathing a sigh of relief. We thought we'd bring some of that into the room here. So I really appreciate you sharing that clip as well.
Well, let's talk red mind, blue mind.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think the relevance maybe of my work, the context of it is situated in the lives we live today in modernity, like real modern society, and the impact that has on our health in particular, which I know you are all working on the kind of the front lines of, and the impact it has on our bodies, our well-being, our communities. And what is happening increasingly because of, and you talked about the importance of language and stories. So one of the dominant stories of our kind of Western modern societies is this really, I suppose, a myth of separation. And that's, you know, in order for capitalism to work, that way of thinking and doing hinges on us believing this story of separation so that we can then extract and consume, turn the rest of nature into a resource for our consumption. But it also creates separation then within our communities with each other, the more disconnected we feel from what gives us life, which is the planet itself. So we begin then to believe that we're separate from nature rather than this integral part of it. And we forget maybe even then what our role is in it all. We lose that ecological kind of lens of seeing and understanding the world that in our language would have tied us to. All Indigenous languages do, and in particular, obviously, Irish, and we're seeing that revival with books and writings from like Moncton McGann, 32 Words for Field, and the power of that is that it really shifts our perspective, our perception of reality, and in particular, our understanding of our relationship to place. So the Irish language especially is a very ecological language that connects us to place. And when we lose that, we often then also lose those kind of place connections. And the way back to that is seeing this kind of resurgence in our understanding of, I suppose, recognizing first our own kind of ill-being, that we can't be well in a sick sea, So red mind basically is symptomatic of the society that we live in. It's this sort of chronic stress response from overstimulation, from being pulled in too many directions, from hyperproductivity, and then that floods the body with cortisol. So when I ride those really big waves, of course the stress red mind kind of kicks in there, and it's useful. It's part of our evolutionary biology and adaptive response, so we can get out of danger. Gives us that hit of adrenaline and cortisol, but we only want it to be temporary and not switched on all the time. And that's what's happening. So in my work, it's looking at, well, what's the antidote? And you've already said it, and I've spoken about it in that clip you just watched, which is blue mind. And blue mind, in essence, is this concept first popularized by a marine biologist, Wallace J. Nichols, a decade ago, in his book of the same name. So it just speaks to our innate connection with water as a human species, that I kind of reference our evolutionary biology, but also like its effect on our psyche, our neurochemistry, our psychological well-being. And there's a whole body of research that I'm involved in that's looking at that, what happens at that interplay when we encounter that aliveness in nature that's really enhanced by water environments because they're so dynamic and multisensory. And so it switches on that blue mind, which is essentially this kind of meditative state, but a kind of effortless one, as opposed to traditional meditation, having to use sort of set techniques. Water is already working us in ways we mightn't even be conscious of. It's, environmental psychologists will call it involuntary attention, so that it just holds us in the present moment in a really effortless way, allowing our nervous system to have a break and down-regulate. And then also lots of evidence, the more we kind of immerse ourselves, the more we are open to those encounters with water. Like I think some of you might have had a cold water dip this morning, which you have to first get over that threshold of discomfort, and then a whole other world opens up, quite literally. But it alters our neurochemistry, kind of releasing that like hit of dopamine, serotonin, and then lowering things like cortisol. So it's increasingly essential in the lives we live today to deal with things like chronic burnout and stress. But I think also even more important underlying that is to then facilitate the antidote to that narrative of separation is one of connection, of belonging, and of feeling, a connection even with our own bodies in a different way, and then each other. So I've seen how it seems to transform also our interpersonal relationships as well when we have those water-based experiences together.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we did have a sauna this morning, and we did a cold lake water immersion, and Zoe, you were freaking out initially. You were going like, I can't do this, and but then once you did it, you were just exhilarated, and we had breakfast, showers, and all that, and you were like, it's kind of like a physiological reset. It's like you're really like reborn. I mean, you just feel fantastic after it, and Will, you were hyper. You wanted to do it again. So tomorrow morning, no problem. So yeah.
Just on the physiological reset, it's also like a psychological reset. There's really interesting research on how it really enhances our creativity, our capacity for creative thinking and problem solving, because it allows our, I suppose that default mode or part of our brains that's, I suppose the effort of having to focus and direct our attention on certain tasks, just as if we can switch that off for a while. And it's like, when you're having a shower, why you sometimes get some of the best insights, or when you're going for a walk. So it allows your mind essentially to wander and not to be ruminating on the past or the future. You're allowing us to have that bizarrely time out in the present.
Yeah, I mean, and that comes back to probably part of our education, particularly in the Western world, in that, the kids are brought into the corridor of kitty, follow this. So you go through primary school, and then if you do quite well in primary school, you can go to the next level of education. And if you do quite well, then maybe you can go to university. And if you do quite well in those exams, you might even be able to pick the courses you do in university. And now when you get to university, then you might be able to do a master's degree, you might be able to do a PhD, and then if you do that, you might be able to choose the job you want. And by the way, you should take out life insurance, and by the way. And then all of a sudden you're 45 and you're thinking like, what happened here? And it's always future orientated. And when you're suddenly getting into the ocean tomorrow, for all of you that will want to do it after this talk, you're really in the moment of now. And really that's all we ever have, because everything that's past is a memory and it's gone. And the future is, again, a thought. So when tomorrow arrives, it's another now. It's always now. But again, our minds, the way we're wired is we're always thinking the past, the future. And water has the power of just bringing you right into the moment, you know.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, it's a lot of, in my work, as well as being a surfer and a research scientist, I write about the human relationship with water and nature, and how we might restore. Essentially, it's about relationships, that relational connection, how that's integral to our well-being and our health. And I firmly believe in our health individually is mirrored in the health of the environment we're in. So the quality and health of our rivers and our waters and the rest of our ecosystems is mirroring the health of our society, because we're not separate from it. So on that, kind of following that kind of train of thought, you were talking too about this, as you probably guessed from my own trajectory and life story, it's anything but linear. I'll follow this and then do that. And maybe it's because of being a surfer, it's very much more focused on cycles. There's seasonal cycles that affect the storm patterns and weather patterns, tidal cycles that influence whether a wave will break on that reef or not. And then, of course, then there's the lunar cycle that influences the movement of the ocean. And so maybe that kind of spilled over into my own life. But I think it's also essential because we live in such a fast-paced society that demands this continuous growth, which the only thing that continuously grows are, viruses and cancer cells. And that's not healthy. And if we look again to nature, there are always these cycles of ebb and flow. And that's essential, especially when it comes to our creativity and innovation. It doesn't happen when we're always on. Like, you need to just honor the downtime. Yeah.
And when I went to one of your wave makers conferences and this came up as a topic, and again focusing on the lunar cycle, definitely as a man and in my family, that wasn't something that we discussed. And I know that as my daughters were growing up and involved in elite sports, and then suddenly having their period, this was seen as something like awkward, like this is an inconvenience. And knowing when to be in the ebb and when to be in the flow, so when to go for it. And I spoke to you earlier there about, I remember at one point having a rhino badge, a rhino on my jacket, which was like charge at everything. It was sleep less, do more. And not realizing that there is the downtime where you need to be down, and to recognize it as this is a good place to be because it's regenerative, it's where you grow, it's where you develop. So again, that language that I heard you talking about cycles, I was like, what am I listening to? And I'm sure some of you right now are going, what are these two talking about? Or are we at a podiatric conference or symposium or a meeting? But again, it's just to get people to think a little bit differently.
Yeah, I think when it comes to our healthcare, and then when you're working with people and your clients, it's, I suppose having the awareness that we're all shifting through these cycles, daily. We'll have an ebb and flow in terms of our energy and our mood, and then over a month and where we are in our own life cycle as well. That also affects, how we show up. And then what I think so much I've learned from surfing in a really kind of maybe indirect way, you often see just those peak moments, the peak performance of like the images you see of those waves, but actually so much more of the time, 90% of the time is spent like in those spaces in between the waves. So like the waiting and the watching and the observing, and then that moment of like flow and where everything all comes together is actually so fleeting, but really totally depends on how I'm showing up. So what I'm bringing into the sea for a particular session. So that need for that, I suppose, that introspection as well is going to actually affect the external performance. So what I'm trying to say is that when you go into a room, when you start your work, how you're showing up is obviously going to affect that dynamic also with your client. And just having, I suppose, that the power of Blue Mind gives you maybe that space, that moment of pause to even notice that. It is just those moments of just being able to unhook, to do that self-check-in. And water, for example, can facilitate that if that's part of your daily habit or any form of kind of nature connection. And then when I talk about, you're seeing a lot of like really immersive experiences in these images, but even looking at water, listening to it, the impact of having just even watched those clips before we started probably had an effect on our nervous systems already. And it's cross-cultural. You see examples also from projects around the world that are tapping into that healing power of water in different ways.
And Easkey is also the author of 3 books. The first one called 50 Things to Do by the Sea, the second one called Salt Water in the Blood, and the third one called Ebb and Flow. And we will arrange to get a copy and send you one of the 3 randomly in the post. And again, the language in it is, I think, quite unique and beautiful. It's nearly like a poetry. There's some really interesting artwork which you've done yourself as well. And when you migrate into the Surfers Bar later, you will see lots of posters created by Easkey's dad, who's a renowned artist in the area. So yeah, not only have you got the PhD, she's also published 3 books. She's also a mama now, little twins, 2 years old. Yeah, and you'll probably have them surfing pretty soon, I would imagine.
Then the researcher in me is sort of geeking out on the fact that this connection we have with nature, with water, with getting our hands dirty is just innate in us when we're let loose from an early age. It's just there. And then it really facilitates play and creative thinking. And then when we start to disengage from that as we get older, especially how our education system is designed, it really has serious consequences on our things like our creative thinking for one, but also our mental health. And then on that, and maybe just another kind of, if we're talking about surfing as a metaphor for life, we spoke about this as well, and about the resilience piece. And I just think as health practitioners as well, often gets overlooked is like our own kind of self-care. And then as parents, or all the different roles we have, can often come secondary. And just how important it is to do that kind of inner work as well. But it's difficult in a society, again, that doesn't, everything is geared towards, in this modern society that we live in, is geared towards making everything as comfortable as possible, to have control over as much as possible within our lives. And there's umpteen apps to do that, to manage everything. And I think what the beauty of water is, especially getting into a wild body of water, is that really we have to let go of all of that. There's absolutely no way we can have control over a wave or an ocean or a river. And there's also that discomfort you probably experienced if you went in for a cold dip this morning. It's just not actually that pleasant to do. And there's a real mental block you have to get over. But when you do, it's the fact that you are entering a challenging environment, that you're overcoming this fear, that there is that level of discomfort. It's like on the other side of that then is this amazing feeling of aliveness that really enhances your adaptive capacity. At a cellular, physiological level, the cold water is doing that. And over time, then that enhances our own adaptive response to any kind of everyday challenges we meet after we come out of the water.
Because at times you're very uncomfortable, and then you get to the point of being comfortable with being uncomfortable.
It doesn't change.
So therefore, less things rattle you. You're kind of like, hey, okay. Yeah.
It's a real boost.
And then, of course, the benefits to your own health in terms of it lowers obviously your core temperature. So then your metabolism has to speed up. So you end up, burning more energy. So you create more brown fat. The whole process is really beneficial for your health. It boosts your immune system. You're less likely to get colds and flus because your whole body's wired to function differently. So it alters your metabolism significantly.
Yeah, there's scientific studies that support that. I find cold water showers really challenging, but even if you start to build up for you do 10 seconds and then up to 30, but anywhere from 30 to a minute is kind of enough to get the benefit, and the studies have shown you that it was in the context, again, all of our science seems to be geared towards how do we make ourselves more productive, which probably isn't the best motivation, but you really reduced the number of sick days that group experience after doing it. I think it was for 3 months, doing this 30 to 60 seconds. And then afterwards, the amount of people that continued to do it because the benefits were so profound.
Bond always finished his hot shower with a cold shower. He always did a minute cold shower at the end. So every time you're having your cold shower, think of James Bond. You can pick your actor. What about breath and ocean?
Yeah, so I love when I work, especially with younger groups, and I do a lot of programs. This is an example here from Sri Lanka. There's another one in Somalia. And so working in areas where there's a lot of maybe trauma associated even with the water itself, or with groups that would have been traditionally excluded from accessing the benefits of the water and recreation like swimming and surfing. But what I love about it is that it's really, we can intellectualize that story of us being ecological beings, we're part of nature, about the interconnectedness of all life. But I think the breath is a lovely way to actually embody that. And I love that, I bring it up all the time, I feel like everyone knows it, maybe you all do, but that every second breath we take comes from the ocean. So we're not typically taught that in school. So here is an image of phytoplankton. And that's what I just find it amazing that these tiny microscopic plants are what makes this planet livable. So the ocean breathes for us, is what I was getting at. There's this symbiotic relationship that's just there. And when you breathe consciously and bring an awareness to that, like wherever you are on the planet, you're connecting with the ocean. And there's this reciprocity, like the ocean is exhaling so that we can breathe in oxygen. And so then any kind of tinkering with that system at large is going to have an impact on us individually as well as collectively.
Yeah, and we came to an event in this very room called Liquid Therapy. And of course, that's what inspired me to simply copy it and steal like an artist and bring my podiatric friends to share this kind of venue. I mean, going back to 2017, we did a Firefly Summit, which came from a surf summit, which was the first time I heard Easkey speak. And I remember listening, thinking she was talking about using surfing to create social change. And at that time, Firefly was sponsoring female athletes in sport and a female soccer team. And then we kind of connected, and this was prior to Brexit, and sterling was worth X compared to the euro, and we had a few quid, and I said, let's sponsor whatever you're doing. And we ended up sponsoring the first Iranian surfer to come to a conference in Portugal. And I remember coming into the Fireflies and saying, okay, we're going to sponsor an Iranian surfer to come from Iran to Portugal. And they all went, what's that got to do with orthotic devices? And I was like, nothing. But we're going with the flow. This sounds good. And here we are. So I came to an event in here, and it was liquid therapy, and that was using the power of water to really create healing. And in that instance, we had some young teenagers on the stage who had really developed confidence through, facing the elements and, developing connections with others. And it was really, really powerful. And it's not just, teenagers going through that whole angst of like, who am I and where am I going? But it was also then people with disabilities and all sorts of challenges. So it was really, really powerful. And I enjoyed the event so much, I just thought, right, we got to do something like this. We got to bring people here and, get them on the beach and get them in the water and, just have great fun, So it really comes back to that connection. And that's a big theme, that at times you'll be meeting people, some some you don't, you'll make new friends. And that's part of this little tribe we're creating, which is really, really special, Okay, well, listen, thank you very much to Easkey. And you only had to come across the road, which was quite convenient. We have several seats empty because flights have not arrived yet, so they didn't get to share or listen to you. I think what we'll do now is we'll show our appreciation, then we'll take a 15-minute break, and then we'll come back for Tim and Claire. Okay? Thank you.